As it nears a year since I first covered the hidden history of Kill.Switch, where I talked about its creation and the mysterious sequel that never was, I wanted to return for a follow-up. This time I wanted to correct some mistakes from my earlier coverage and share new details I've learned after speaking directly with Alvin Muolic, Esaki and Matt Sentell. Many of these facts have remained in the dark for over 20 years. The origins of Kill.Switch trace back to Matt Sentell and Esaki. Both producers were dissatisfied with how third-person shooters of the time underutilized cover mechanics. To them, shooting was less about running and gunning and more about the art of leaning on walls and firing strategically. Esaki once experimented with a Dead-to-Rights prototype in the style of a light gun game. When I spoke to him, he explained the idea behind this early concept. As Pac-Man World 2 was wrapping up, I had a bunch of game concept ideas that I was shopping around internally and doing some prototype work on gameplay mechanic ideas. Of these concepts, most relevant to Kill.Switch were a light gun game based off the Dead-to-Rights IP, or really just the mechanics, and a ninja-inspired shooter. The light gun game had two main mechanics that made up the core gameplay: cover and bullet time. Similar to how something like Time Crisis worked, the player would automatically move to action spots and would have to clear the area of all enemies before automatically moving to the next spot. In Time Crisis, each spot was a cover-based location where the player could duck, hide behind some piece of cover, and pop out and shoot the enemies. We used that core cover concept and added a cinematic bullet time component that would charge up like a super move. The player could both trigger the cover mechanic of popping in and out of cover and could also trigger the bullet time mechanic when it was charged. The player would dive out of cover in slow motion and could then more easily target enemies without the risk of taking damage. We used the Dead-to-Rights assets to bash this together and had something pretty fun in a week or so. The working codename for Kill.Switch was Loose Cannon, and it was nearly the official title. However, another game was due to release under the same name back then, so to avoid legal complications the team changed it. However, that game was eventually cancelled. The name Kill.Switch emerged after a discussion between Alvin Muolic and Scott Chrysostomo. Alvin recalls the moment in detail. Chris, Scott, and I were in the same room around at the same time and came up with the title of Kill.Switch. I intentionally chose to use the more stylized Kill.Switch spelling. In hindsight, I should have made it Kill.Switch to also reflect the bad reprogramming that Bishop had undergone via Archer's control. While Dead-to-Rights enjoyed AAA status with a generous budget, Kill.Switch was developed on a fraction of those resources and was greenlit as a budget title. Executives at Namco Hometek initially pushed for a Vietnam-based third-person shooter with heavy influence drawn from Apocalypse Now. The original vision was about war meets horror, with a much darker tone. A shakeup in Namco Hometek's leadership scrapped the Vietnam concept. The upside was that the team gained freedom to explore different settings. The downside was that they were suddenly left with just a year to finish the game. The clock was ticking. Among the many directions explored was a sci-fi setting influenced by Ghost in the Shell, Robocop, and The Terminator. Time constraints, however, meant these inspirations only filtered into the game's tone and some of the overall design. Unlike Dead-to-Rights, which ran on an in-house engine, the team had to rely on renderware. This was another compromise born from the tight budget and schedule. The cover and blind fire mechanics were heavily inspired by the film Black Hawk Down, while Scott Chrysostomo noted some influence from Time Crisis. Alvin Muolic distinctly remembers Black Hawk Down as the blueprint. Surprisingly, the team didn't even know about Koei's win-back until a few months before Kill.Switch launch. Budget and technical limits forced creative workarounds. For example, instead of over-the-top cinematics that would take months to produce, the developers created a 5 minute video and chopped it into segments shown throughout the campaign. Alvin explains the process. Instead of spending all of the available budget on a single introductory movie, I opted to use what we could afford for in-between level cutscenes. Because of the CG budget constraints, I went with the plot convention of Amnesia, so that I could use the footage more than once. This was also inspired by the films RoboCop and Memento, which also led me to have Bishop be more of a tragic hero than the gung-ho, badass soldier one might expect. You don't actually play as Bishop until the final levels of the game. Before then, it's Archer, the controller, and Dushes controlling him. Around 5 minutes of pre-rendered CG footage was stretched out and repeated over several game levels, revealing more of the story each time it played. The roll and dive mechanic wasn't inspired by shooters at all. It came from NFL Blitz. Matt Sentell explains, "There were a number of game inspirations at work. For instance, the dive rolling. I remember I kept referencing the American football game, NFL Blitz, when we were figuring out how that should work. It needed to be really powerful in terms of distance covered so that you could dive away from grenades thrown at you or dive into cover, so it needed to be a bit over the top. Of course, action diving was all over the place at the time with things like The Matrix, John Woo films, and Namco Hometek's own Dead to Rights. Early beta footage reveals a very different design for protagonist Nick Bishop, or should I say, Ninja Bishop. After the Vietnam concept was abandoned, the team explored numerous alternatives. Alvin recalls, "Once we dropped the Vietnam War concept, we stuck with the war meets horror theme at first. During this period, we were scrambling to find a concept that would support everything that's been done and created to date. The clock was ticking. One concept involved a supernaturally powered soldier forever, cursed to roam the earth and wage war, which would let us use the existent Vietnam War levels we'd had. The regenerating health mechanic sprung from that idea. Another concept that we had briefly attempted was a Hellboy Indiana Jones alternate timeline in which the Nazis had won World War II. What we got out of this were more level environments and smarter, more varied enemy AI. A sci-fi Ghost in the Shell inspired direction was briefly considered. Some of those cyberpunk elements would ultimately be used in Kill.Switch's story." Nick Bishop's story as a pawn and killing machines suffering from blackouts became a narrative tool. His shutdowns between missions cleverly masked transitions to new settings, fitting the theme of him being just a machine.
Look out! Hit the dirt!
Unlike most shooters where you play as the hero, Namco Hometek positioned the player as the villain. You weren't ending wars, you were starting them. Early builds included blood during the murder of Bishop's fiancée, but Namco Hometek wanted a T-rated game, so the blood effect was changed. Early demos were considerably harder with unpredictable AI and high damage count. A great deal of effort went into balancing the AI to keep it challenging without being unfair. A great deal of effort also went into making the AI as intelligent as possible. Alvin outlined the many hurdles the team faced and how they worked around them. What would become of the Kill.Switch IP, story, and overall game structure was created with the following notable constraints in place. I had to somehow fit the previously generated Vietnam War, World War II, and other art assets into the story. I had minimal CG and voice-over budget. There was no tech in place for in-game cinematics, let alone any artists who could work on them. Nick Bishop's design was an amalgamation of influences: Captain America, Nick Fury, and Bishop the android from Aliens. A secondary character, the Duchess, was originally meant to be playable. Time constraints forced the team to cut her. Alvin explains, the Duchess was intended to be a playable character but was cut from the game due to time. After the controller dies, you technically play as her while she's controlling Bishop. Christian Gossett, creator of the Red Star, provided character concept art, much of which appeared in the strategy guide. Dush's look drew inspiration from Fate in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, while Lin Takamura, Bishop's fiancée, was modeled after actress China Shou from The Big Hit. The original game's script was slightly trimmed. Kill.Switch was the first third-person shooter to use ADS. This feature was made thanks to associate producer Scott Chrysostomo. After Kill.Switch, 2 follow-ups were planned, though these were not direct sequels but more like spiritual successors. The first was The Adversary, followed by The Displacement, City Under Siege. Both were eventually cancelled after months of development. Kill.Switch's tagline was "Take cover, take aim, take over." By contrast, The Adversary embraced style with the tagline "Lead a killer lifestyle." Alvin describes its concept. The Adversary's high concept was that of playing the bad guy and living up the fantasy lifestyle of one. In the game, you'd be able to play as a contract killer, assassin, special forces operative of your own unique, customized character. Its tagline was, "Lead a killer lifestyle." Matt Sentell served as the lead producer on Kill.Switch. Chris Esaki took over as lead on The Adversary and The Displacement after Sentell left for EA. Alvin, on the other hand, was the creative director. Both The Adversary and The Displacement sought to expand Kill.Switch's cover system while focusing heavily on multiplayer, with support of up to 16 players online. An Xbox build of The Adversary exists somewhere, though its whereabouts remain unknown. Development originally began on the PS2 and Xbox with plans to shift production to the upcoming Xbox 360. Alvin Muolic also pitched 2 direct continuations of Kill.Switch, one of which was titled Kill.Switch 2 Crossfire. Crossfire would have been darker, expanding on the original with stealth mechanics, advanced movement, special abilities, more weapons, alternate firing modes, gadgets, and tactical options. Building on these concepts, Crossfire introduced arms, the augmented reflexes mechanics system. This aimed for over-the-top Hong Kong-style cinematic action layered on top of the Kill.Switch mechanics. The Adversary was shown at E3 2004 and video footage exists somewhere. Kill.Switch was originally banned in the Middle East, particularly Iraq, Syria, and other South Asian countries like Pakistan. This was because of, according to them, the offensive depiction of the people there. The ban was mysteriously lifted after Saddam Hussein's death. Visual Impact, in association with Namco Hometek, made a GBA port for the game, which is surprisingly decent. Commercially, Kill.Switch wasn't a hit, but it wasn't a flop either, especially considering the small budget. Kill.Switch is one of the few Namco games that are not backwards compatible on the Xbox One or the Series X. Despite its modest reception, Kill.Switch went on to inspire modern shooters with its offensive cover and blind fire system, leaving a legacy far bigger than its sales suggested.